when he looked at me with those bloodshot eyes, soaked in whiskey, and said, "Today you're gonna work for real." I knew my childhood had ended right there, in the back of that dirty bar in downtown Detroit. Hello, my dear viewers. This is Grandma Annie, 72 years young, sharing a story I've kept locked in my heart for too long. Today, I've decided to open up about how I survived horrors no child should ever know, and how I transformed that pain into something that could help others. I'm sitting here in my modest home in Lakewood, Denver, with this beautiful view of the Rocky Mountain sunset that I never tire of admiring. My grandchildren are all grown up now. I even have great-grandchildren, and they all tell me I need to share my story to inspire other women. So here I am, with a cup of tea by my side, gathering my courage. Before I begin, I'd love for you to leave a comment letting me know where you're watching this video from. I'm always curious to know if I have virtual grandkids from all across America, and if you could give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel, this grandma's heart would be warmed with joy. Now let's get to the story. I was born in 1953, in a Detroit very different from the one we know today. Back then, the Detroit River was clean enough to swim in. Streetcars crisscrossed the city, and Eastern Market was the beating heart where everyone gathered. My father, Arnold, worked there as a porter, carrying heavy bags and boxes for ladies doing their shopping. He was a strong man, with rough hands and an always stern face. My mother, Irene, I barely knew. She died when I was only 3, from a fever that never broke. They say it was tuberculosis, but back then, poor folks didn't get proper diagnoses. They just wasted away until they couldn't hold on anymore. The only memory I have of her is the lavender scent she wore and a lullaby she'd whisper to help me sleep. Sometimes, on the quietest nights, I can still hear that melody like a friendly ghost visiting my dreams. After she passed, it was just my father and me in that damp tenement in Corktown. Just one room, with a 2-burner stove, a bed we shared, and an old trunk where we kept what few clothes we owned. At first, he tried to be a good father. He'd take me with him to work at the market, sit me on a crate next to Mr. John's fruit stand, who'd slip me oranges when my father wasn't looking. "Poor little thing, no mother," people would say, thinking I couldn't hear. And they'd add, "And with a father like that?" I never quite understood what they meant by "like that" until I was a bit older. The problem was that my father drank. Not occasionally, no, every single day. He'd start with whiskey in mid-morning, to ward off the cold, he'd say, then another at lunchtime, to help digestion. By late afternoon, when he finished work, it was 3 or 4 more at the bars on Michigan Avenue before coming home. On good days, he'd just stumble in, eat whatever I'd managed to prepare on the stove. I learned to cook at 6, standing on a stool to reach the pots, and fall into bed snoring until the next day. On bad days, he'd come home breaking everything, shouting that I was just like my mother, a pest that only cost money. And he'd beat me with his belt until he got tired. I learned early to read the signs. The way he'd rub his chin when irritated, the glazed look that indicated he'd drunk too much, the stronger smell of whiskey mixed with sweat. When I sensed it would be a bad day, I'd hide at Mrs. Marlene's place, our neighbor in the tenement, an elderly lady who let me hide under her bed until my father fell asleep. "Child," she'd tell me while giving me a piece of bread with lard, "you've got to study, you hear? It's the only way out of this life." And study I did, with a hunger that went beyond my empty stomach. At the public school where I was enrolled because it was mandatory, I was always the first to arrive and the last to leave. Not because I loved studying that much, but because at school I got lunch, had electric lights that didn't fail like in the tenement, and most importantly, I wasn't at home. The teachers noticed my effort. "This girl has a future," they'd say among themselves. Mrs. Cecilia, who taught 4th grade, even gave me a new notebook when she saw mine was running out and patched with tape. It was the first real gift I remember receiving. For a while, I thought things might improve. My father got a better job as a security guard at a warehouse, earning a little more. We moved to a bigger room, still in Corktown, but with our own bathroom, no longer shared with 5 other families like in the tenement. I even had my own little bed, a luxury I never imagined possible. It was during this time, when I was about 10, that I met Whiskers, a stray cat I secretly adopted. My father hated animals, said they were useless mouths to feed. But Whiskers was smart and knew to hide when he heard the stumbling footsteps on the stairs. That skinny gray cat was my first real friend. The first creature I could give affection to and receive it back, without fear. Sometimes, when my father wasn't around, I'd talk to Whiskers as if he were a person. I'd tell him about school, about my dreams of one day becoming a teacher like Mrs. Cecilia, or maybe a nurse. I imagined a different life, where I'd have a clean house with flowery curtains and a small garden, where no one would yell at me or hit me for any little thing. One day we'll get out of here, Whiskers, I'd promise, scratching behind his ear. One day we'll have a better life. Little did I know that things were about to get worse in ways I couldn't imagine even in my worst nightmares. Everything changed in the winter of 1964. A harsh winter, the kind that leaves Detroit covered in an icy fog that seems to swallow the entire city. My father lost his job at the warehouse. I never knew exactly why, but I'd bet it had to do with the drinking or money that disappeared from the register. We went 2 weeks without paying rent for our room, and the landlord had already come knocking 3 times, threatening to put us out on the street. We had almost nothing to eat except some leftover flour and a few shriveled potatoes. Even Whiskers had disappeared, probably in search of better food elsewhere. On one of those bitterly cold nights, my father came home different. He wasn't drunk as usual, but had a strange gleam in his eye, a nervous energy that immediately frightened me. "Pack your things, girl," he said, tossing a paper bag in my direction. "We're moving tomorrow." "Where to, Dad?" I asked, suspicious. We'd been evicted before, but normally he'd warn me at the last minute, not in advance. "I got a good deal," he replied, smiling in a way that didn't reach his eyes. "I'm going to manage an establishment over by the North End. There'll be a room for both of us, food on the table every day. You won't go hungry anymore." Something about that story didn't smell right, but what could I do? I was an 11-year-old girl, with no one in the world besides this difficult man who was my father. And to be honest, the idea of having food every day was too tempting to ignore. The next morning, we put our few belongings in 2 bags and took a bus toward the North End, Detroit's industrial area. As we moved away from downtown, the streets got darker, dirtier, with abandoned warehouses and factory chimneys releasing gray smoke into the already cloudy sky. We got off on a narrow street full of old 2-story houses, many with windows boarded up or covered by heavy curtains. There were no children playing around, just tired-looking men coming in and out of factories, and some women with very red lipstick standing on corners, despite the cold. My father stopped in front of a large house, painted a faded red, with a wooden sign that read, "Night Flower Inn." There were lights on inside, even though it was morning, and a strong smell of cheap perfume and cigarettes wafted from inside. "This is it," he said, pushing open the iron gate that creaked as if in protest. Our new home. It was at that moment, standing in front of that red house, that I felt a tightness in my chest, as if something were warning me I was about to cross a door from which I could never return. If I had known what awaited me inside, I would have run far away, even with nowhere to go. But I was just a frightened girl, cold and hungry, following the only adult who was supposed to protect me into what would become the beginning of my personal hell. Oh, my dear viewers who have stayed with me this far, how difficult it is to relive these memories. Sometimes I need to pause, take a deep breath, sip my tea to be able to continue. But I know this story needs to be told, because unfortunately, there are many Annies out there, girls who had their childhood stolen and who need to know it's possible to survive. It's possible to rebuild life even after the worst. Don't forget to leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. I have a granddaughter who lives in Portland and always sends me kisses through her phone. Technology is a wonderful thing, isn't it? In my day, it was letters that took weeks to arrive. Thank you for staying with me this far. I remember as if it were yesterday the moment I crossed that red door of the Night Flower Inn. The strong smell of cheap perfume mixed with alcohol and cigarette smoke made me nauseous immediately. Everything inside seemed to be covered by a veil of dust that danced in the sunbeams coming through the cracks in the heavy curtains. The walls, lined with faded red wallpaper, had suspicious stains and pictures of half-naked women in poses that made me lower my eyes in shame. A tall woman, with bleached blonde hair and long nails painted red, came to receive us. She must have been about 40, but her face was marked in a way that made her look much older. She wore a satin robe over a short nightgown, even though it was still morning, and had a cigarette hanging from the corner of her mouth. "Arnold, finally arrived," she said, kissing my father's cheek. "And this must be the girl you mentioned." She looked me up and down, like someone evaluating an animal at the market. Her eyes lingered on mine, then slowly moved down my still childish body. I felt an icy shiver run up my spine. "A bit skinny, isn't she?" she commented, blowing smoke upward. "She'll fatten up now that she'll eat properly," my father replied, patting my back as if showing off a prize puppy. "Where are our rooms, Carmen?" The woman gave a hoarse laugh that seemed to scratch her throat. "Your room is in the back, near the kitchen. Hers. Well, we'll see where we fit the girl." Something in the way she said that put me on alert. I clutched the bag with my things against my chest, as if that handful of old clothes could protect me. We climbed a creaking staircase to the second floor, where a narrow corridor led to several closed doors. Everything was silent at that hour of the morning. I later discovered that the inn only came to life after 6 in the evening. "This will be your bed for now," said Carmen, opening the door to a small room with 3 single beds. "You'll share with Sonia and Dora. They're sleeping now, so don't make noise." On the beds, 2 young women slept deeply. One had purple marks on the arm that extended from under the sheet. The other had her face turned to the wall, but her bleached hair spread across the pillow like dried straw. "And the bathroom?" I asked softly. "At the end of the corridor. Use it quickly when you go. The girls need to look pretty at night." My father had already disappeared downstairs. Didn't even say goodbye. I stood there, in the middle of that strange room, holding my bag, not knowing what to do. Carmen looked at me impatiently. "Put your things in that drawer there and come down. There's work in the kitchen." From that day on, my routine was quickly established. I woke up early, before the girls on the second floor, and helped clean the house. I washed piles of stained sheets, scrubbed the sticky floor of the salon where there was a small stage with a pole in the middle, and cleaned dozens of glasses smeared with lipstick and drinks. In the afternoon, I helped in the kitchen, peeling potatoes and preparing dinner for the clients who arrived at night. I no longer attended school. My father said I didn't need that anymore, that now I had a trade to learn. The residents of the house, whom I soon discovered were prostitutes, treated me with a mixture of pity and distance. Some were kind, like Sonia, who shared the room with me and sometimes gave me candy or lent me a photo novel book. Others barely noticed my existence, too busy with their own problems, almost all addicted to something: alcohol, pills, or that white powder they snorted before going down to work. Carmen, the manager of the place, kept hawk eyes on everything and everyone. Nothing happened in that house without her knowledge, and she and my father formed a perfect pair of exploiters. She took care of the girls, and he dealt with the clients, collecting, intimidating when necessary, and settling accounts with the police officers who appeared regularly to receive their extra salary. For almost a year, I managed to remain just the girl who cleaned and helped in the kitchen. I prayed every night, as Mrs. Marlene had taught me, asking that it would continue like this. But deep down, I knew I was just postponing the inevitable. The change came when I turned 12. I didn't even remember it was my birthday. No one had ever made a point of celebrating it after all. I was in the kitchen, as always, peeling potatoes, when my father entered with Carmen. "It's time she started giving back for what she eats," my father said, lighting a cigarette. "Margarita left last week and the Turk is asking for a younger girl." Carmen looked at me appraisingly. "She's still a child, Arnold. Doesn't even have a body yet." "Some people like them just like that," he retorted. And there was something so cold, so calculating in his eyes that I didn't recognize the man in front of me as my father. At that moment, I understood what it meant to have a broken heart. Not from romantic love, but from a disillusionment so deep that it breaks something essential inside you. The man who should protect me against all the evils of the world was delivering me to them with open hands. "Dad," I managed to say, voice failing, tears already blurring my vision. "Please, no." He barely looked at me. "Stop the whining. You think life is easy? That you can have a full belly without doing anything? Everyone here works. You're no better than anyone." I tried to run, but where to? I had no one in the world, nowhere to go. The streets of Detroit in winter could be cruel for a girl alone, perhaps even worse than that house. Or at least, that's what I thought at the time, too young to understand that nothing could be worse than what was to come. That same night, after a forced beauty bath, where Carmen scrubbed my skin until it was red and washed my hair with overly perfumed shampoo, they dressed me in a thin, white nightgown. "The Turk likes this innocent style," Carmen explained as she applied light lipstick to my lips. "Don't cry. It smudges the makeup," she said. Not with kindness, but with the impatience of someone who has a job to do. "And it's no use struggling. It only makes everything worse. It ends eventually." The Turk wasn't really Turkish. He was a fat man, about 50, who owned a shoe factory in the North End. A special client, as Carmen called him, the type who paid well for privileges. What happened in that room, that night, is something that for a long time I couldn't even put into words. The pain, the humiliation, the paralyzing fear. I closed my eyes and transported myself far away, to a beach I had seen in a school book, with blue waters and white sand. I imagined myself running free, far from all that, while my body remained trapped in that stuffy room, being used as if it were nothing more than an object. When it was over, the Turk patted my head, as one does with an obedient dog, and left some bills on the dresser. "Good girl," he said, adjusting his clothes. "I'll be back next week." I could barely drag myself back to the room I shared with Sonia and Dora. When I got there, bleeding and trembling, Sonia was awake, smoking, sitting on the bed. She looked at me, and I saw something in her eyes, a mixture of pity and recognition, like someone seeing their own past reflected in another person. "Come here," she said, making space on the bed beside her. "I'll clean you up." With a cloth soaked in warm water, she gently cleaned my injured body, then gave me a pill. "For the pain," she explained. "Tomorrow will be better." But it wasn't better the next day, nor the next, nor the following week. The Turk returned, as promised, and brought friends. Then came other men, merchants, factory workers, truck drivers, sometimes even police officers. My father received the money, always satisfied with how much I yielded, and in return gave me a roof, food, and occasionally a new dress, to attract more clients, he said. Sometimes it wasn't even just men wanting sex. Some just wanted young company to drink and talk with, to show off to their friends. Those were moments of relief, albeit brief. A farmer from Rochester even gave me a silver brooch once, after a night where I only had to sit next to him while he drank and told stories from his youth. The months turned into years. Detroit changed outside. They talked about civil rights movement, Vietnam, missing activists, arrested students. Inside the Nightflower Inn, little changed. Girls arrived, others left, for other houses, to marry clients who fell in love, or simply disappeared without a trace. Some died, from overdoses, botched abortions, illnesses that no one properly treated. When I turned 15, I was no longer the novelty of the house. Other younger girls had arrived, brought by desperate parents for money, exploitative boyfriends, or by life's own cruel circumstances. I had a certain position now. Older clients specifically asked for me, and Carmen even let me keep some tips hidden from my father. It was at this time that I met Jeremy, a young man who worked delivering drinks to the brothel. He was 18, with kind eyes and a quiet way of observing everything. Whenever he saw me, he smiled in a way different from other men. Not with lust or interest, but with something like respect. We started talking in the moments when he delivered boxes of beer and whiskey. I discovered that he studied at night, after work, dreaming of becoming a teacher someday. When I told him that I had also wanted to study more, he started bringing me books hidden among the bottles. "Knowledge is something no one can take from you," he would say, as he showed me where he had stopped in the previous reading. For the first time in years, I felt something like hope. Jeremy spoke of a world out there that I had almost forgotten existed, a world where people worked in normal jobs, studied, built families by choice and love, not by obligation or desperation. In my daydreams, I imagined running away with him, starting a new life far from there. But reality always imposed itself cruelly. I had no documents. My father kept everything. No money of my own, besides the few tips I hid in the mattress lining. And most importantly, I had nowhere to go. Besides, my father seemed to have eyes everywhere. Once, when he saw me talking with Jeremy for too long, he gave me such a violent beating that I couldn't work for 3 days, which only made him even more furious. "You're my source of income, don't forget," he shouted, the whiskey breath engulfing me as he squeezed my face between his fingers. "If you try to run away, I'll find you and break your legs." I knew it wasn't just a threat. I had seen what he did to Denise, one of the girls who tried to escape taking money from the cash box. When they brought her back, a week later, she could barely walk, and her face was so disfigured that some regular clients didn't even recognize her. At 16, I had lost count of how many men had passed through my body, how many humiliations I had swallowed in silence, how many nights I had cried myself to sleep. My only escape were the books that Jeremy brought and the small kindnesses we exchanged when no one was looking. A smile, a touch of hands, a word of encouragement. "You're strong, Annie," he would tell me. "Stronger than you think. One day you'll get out of here." I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe in something to keep waking up each morning. But the years at the Night Flower Inn had taught me to doubt promises and to fear dreams that were too big. Hope, I discovered early, can be the cruelest torture when you live in a world with no exit. However, even in the darkest places, life finds ways to move forward. And so, between pain and small stolen moments of joy, I began to plan my liberation, not yet knowing how or when, but with the growing certainty that I would not die in that red house, that my story would not end there, being just another girl broken by her own father and by the system that allowed men like him to exist with impunity. What I didn't know was that my chance would come in a way I could never have predicted, through a tragedy that would forever change the course of my life. The winter of 1970 in Detroit was one of the coldest I remember. The bitter wind blew through the poorly sealed corridors of the Night Flower Inn, making the windows rattle and the girls huddle under thin blankets. I was 17 years old by then and felt as if I had lived several lives within those red walls. My body had changed. I was no longer the skinny girl who entered there 6 years ago. Now I had curves that men coveted, long hair that Carmen insisted I keep for clients to have something to hold on to, as she said with her casual cruelty. My face had lost any trace of childhood, hardened by experiences that no one should live through. The brothel had also changed. With the intensification of anti-vice campaigns, police officers made frequent raids on establishments like ours, not to save us, never for that, but to extort more money or free services. My father, always alert to opportunities, began trafficking information as much as bodies. Drunk clients talked too much, and he knew exactly who to sell those careless words to. It was during this time that things worsened in a way I couldn't imagine was possible. It was no longer just attending to the regular clients of the brothel. My father began to rent me out for private parties, meetings in luxury hotels, even for short trips with businessmen passing through Detroit. "It's a promotion," he said, laughing, when he told me about the new arrangement. "These men pay 5 times more than the factory workers who come here, and you just need to smile, dance a little, and do the usual." The usual. As if it were normal. As if each time didn't cost a piece of my soul. At one of these parties, I met Congressman Myers. I won't say his full name even after so many years. Some demons don't deserve to be invoked even by memory. He was a man in his 50s, with a prominent belly under expensive suits, gray hair always well-combed, and a smile that froze the blood. He claimed to be a defender of the American family during the day, on podiums and in interviews. At night, he was one of the worst predators I've ever known. He took an interest in me immediately. "I want the dark-haired one," he said to my father, pointing as if choosing a cut of meat at the butcher's. That night was one of the worst of my life. The congressman didn't just want sex, he wanted power, he wanted to subjugate, he wanted to hurt. When I returned to the brothel the next morning, I was so injured that even Carmen, normally indifferent to our suffering, widened her eyes. "My God, girl, what did he do to you?" I couldn't answer. I just dragged myself to the room and fainted on the bed, waking hours later with Sonia cleaning my wounds. I had to stay almost a week without working to recover minimally. I thought it would be the end, that I would never have to see that man again. But I was wrong. Congressman Myers liked our session so much that he made a proposal to my father. He wanted exclusivity with me, at least twice a week. He would pay a monthly sum that made my father's eyes shine with greed. "It's your chance to move up in life, girl," he told me when he told me about the deal, as if he were offering me a legitimate job opportunity. An influential man like that. Who knows? He might fall in love and take you away from here. The idea of marrying that monster to escape seemed as terrible as staying in the brothel. Either way, I had no choice. My father had already accepted the money, had already made the promise. And so began a new chapter of my personal hell. For almost a year, I was Congressman Myers' private property. Sometimes he would take me to an apartment he kept downtown, other times to hotels, occasionally to parties where I was exhibited as a trophy before being used in the back rooms by him and sometimes by his political friends. I met judges, businessmen, even a general during this period. Powerful men who decided the fate of the country during the day and, at night, treated girls like me as less than human. I heard conversations I shouldn't have heard, secrets about illegal business, about people who disappeared, about money that vanished from public coffers. "You didn't hear anything, understand?" Myers would always remind me, with a painful grip on my arm or my neck. Girls who talk too much end up floating in the Detroit River. It wasn't an empty threat. One of the girls from the brothel, Louise, had disappeared after talking too much to a drunk journalist. They found her body 3 days later near Belle Isle. The police filed the case as an accidental drowning. The congressman liked to hurt me in ways that wouldn't leave visible marks, or at least not in places others could see. He took a sick pleasure in making me beg, in humiliating me in every possible way. Sometimes he brought gifts, an expensive dress, a perfume, jewelry, as if that compensated for the terror he made me live through. "You should be grateful," he would say, as he placed a pearl necklace around my neck, marked by his fingers. "How many young girls of your class have things like this?" It was during this time that I began to seriously think about killing myself. The idea of death seemed a relief from the life I was leading. I started to save pills that some of the girls used to sleep, hiding them in a crack in the wall behind the headboard of my bed. When I had enough, I would end it all. But then, on one of the darkest days, when I already had almost 20 pills hidden and was planning to use them the next weekend, Jeremy appeared with a new book for me. It was The Little Prince, a children's story I had never read. "It seems silly, but it's not," he said with that gentle smile that was like a ray of sunshine amid the constant storm of my life. "I think you'll like it." I read the book in secret, in small intervals during the day, when I should have been sleeping to regain energy for the night, and something in that simple story touched what remained of my humanity. The prince's rose, so fragile and yet so important. The stars that laugh for those who know how to look. The fox who talks about creating bonds. It is only with the heart that one can see rightly. What is essential is invisible to the eye. That phrase kept hammering in my head for days. What was essential in me? What still remained that they couldn't touch, couldn't soil, couldn't break? I returned the book to Jeremy the following week, along with the pills I had saved. "What's this?" he asked, confused. "Something I won't need anymore," I replied. "This book made me remember that I'm still alive, that I can still feel something beyond pain and fear." His eyes filled with tears, and I realized he had understood exactly what those pills meant. Without saying anything, he just hugged me. A pure hug, with no ulterior motives, the kind of touch I had almost forgotten existed. It was at this moment that we decided we needed to try to escape, no matter the risk, no matter the price. Anything would be better than that half-life I was leading. For months we planned in secret. Jeremy saved money from his salary as a delivery man, keeping every penny he could. I began to hide part of the tips I occasionally received, sewing them into the lining of an old coat that no one paid attention to. I also saved information. I listened carefully to Congressman Myers' conversations with his friends, memorizing names, dates, locations of secret meetings. "If they catch us," I explained to Jeremy. This could be our life insurance. It wasn't much, but it was something. A chance, however small. Our opportunity came when we learned that my father was planning to sell me completely to the congressman. No more just regular meetings, but a complete transfer. I would live in Meyer's apartment as his official housekeeper, available 24 hours a day for his whims. "It's the best deal I've ever made," my father boasted to Carmen, not knowing I was listening behind the door. "A one-time payment, a windfall. I'll never have to worry about her again. Never have to worry about me again." As if he had ever worried, as if he had ever been a real father. The transfer was to happen in a week. We didn't have all the money we had planned to save, nor a fully formed plan, but it was now or never. Jeremy managed to get fake documents from an acquaintance who worked at a county clerk's office. They weren't perfect, but they would serve to get us far from there. On the eve of our escape, I faced my reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror of the brothel. Who was that woman looking back at me? In the eyes, a hardness that no 18-year-old should have. On the body, marks that told stories no one should live. But also, for the first time in a long time, a spark of something that looked like hope. "Tomorrow," I whispered to my reflection. "Tomorrow we'll be free." Little did I know that fate had other plans for that night. Plans that would involve blood, fire, and a transformation that I couldn't have imagined even in my craziest dreams. That same night, while I was discreetly packing my few things for the escape, I heard screams coming from downstairs, not the usual screams of drunks celebrating or some fight between clients. They were screams of pure terror. I ran to the stairs and saw a scene I will never forget. My father, staggering in the middle of the salon, a broken bottle in his hand, blood flowing from a deep cut on his face. In front of him, Congressman Myers, red with fury, shouting about having been deceived. "You sold the girl to others too, after our agreement." My father, drunk as always, laughed provocatively. "So what? What are you going to do? Report me, you of all people?" It all happened very quickly. The congressman pulled out a small gun from inside his jacket and fired. Once, twice, 3 times. My father fell like a sack of potatoes on the dirty floor of the brothel, blood pooling around him. The girls were screaming, the clients running outside. Carmen tried to calm Myers, but he was beside himself. He fired again, hitting an oil lamp that exploded against the dry wooden wall. In seconds, the fire began to spread. From the stairs where I was paralyzed, I saw the congressman look up and see me. His eyes met mine, and in them was a clear promise that I would be next. He began to climb the steps, gun in hand, while behind him the fire devoured curtains and furniture with frightening speed. I ran back to the room, locked the door, and in blind desperation broke the window with a chair. The second floor wasn't so high. Below was a small roof of an attached storage shed. Without thinking twice, I grabbed my coat with the sewn-in money and jumped. The fall was painful. I felt my ankle twist, but fear made me ignore the pain. I slipped down the roof and fell into the side alley, right where Jeremy was waiting for me. Earlier than agreed, thank heavens. "Annie! My God, what happened?" There was no time for complete explanations. "My father is dead. Myers went crazy. The house is on fire. We have to run." He didn't question. He helped me up, and together we fled into the Detroit night while behind us, the Night Flower Inn became a hell of flames, taking with it horror stories that no one would ever fully know. Limping, supported by Jeremy, I looked back one last time. The sky was orange with the reflection of the flames, and I could hear in the distance the sirens of the fire trucks approaching. I didn't know who had managed to escape, who was trapped in the flames. The guilt for not having tried to help the other girls would eat at me for years, even knowing that I probably would have died if I had gone back. That night, I lost everything I knew. The roof where I lived, the father who was never really a father, the miserable but predictable life I led. But I also gained something precious. Freedom. A freedom stained with blood and ashes, born of tragedy. But still, freedom. What I didn't know was that that night of fire and death would be just the beginning of my true journey. That from the ashes of that house of horrors, I would be reborn, not as a victim, but as someone determined to bring justice, not just for myself, but for all the girls whose voices were silenced in the shadows of places like the Nightflower Inn. Jeremy and I fled through dark alleys of Detroit that night, the glow of the fire illuminating the sky behind us like a terrible dawn. My ankle throbbed with pain, but fear gave wings to my feet. Jeremy led me to a cheap boarding house in the Rivertown district, where an elderly lady, Mrs. Judith, rented us a small room in the back without asking too many questions. "You two look too scared for people just looking for a place to sleep," she commented, eyeing my inappropriate clothes and the dried blood on my arms, the result of cuts from the broken window. "What are you running from?" "Everything," I replied, with an honesty that surprised even myself. She just nodded, like someone who had seen too much of life to be shocked by anything. "The room is small and the bathroom is shared, but it's clean. Pay in advance, no registration for now." That cubicle with peeling walls would become our refuge for the next few months. We slept on a thin mattress on the floor, cooked on an improvised hot plate, washed our few clothes in the communal bathroom sink. It was a life of deprivation, but still incomparably better than the one I had left behind. The day after our escape, the newspapers reported the fire at the house of ill repute in the North End. 7 dead, including my father and 2 of the girls who couldn't escape in time. Congressman Meyer's name didn't appear anywhere in the report, just a mention of a client who is being sought for questioning. Power was already working to protect its own. Jeremy got a job at a furniture factory nearby. The pay was miserable, but it was honest. I couldn't look for work. I had no real documents, and the fear of being recognized by some former client paralyzed me. I spent my days locked in the little room, looking through the small window that faced an inner courtyard, like a bird that still doesn't believe the cage door is open. At night, nightmares haunted me. I would wake up screaming, covered in cold sweat, reliving the horrors of all those years. Jeremy would hold me in silence until I calmed down, never demanding more than I could give, never touching me in a way that might remind me of the men who had passed through my body. A month after our escape, I saw in the newspaper Jeremy brought that Congressman Myers had been cleared of any involvement in the brothel fire. Witnesses could not confirm his presence at the scene, said the small article, hidden in the corner of a page. The anger I felt at that moment was different from anything I had experienced before. It wasn't the powerless fear from before, but something burning, something that demanded action. "He can't simply get away with it," I told Jeremy, crumpling the newspaper between my fingers. "He killed people. He was going to kill me too. What can we do? He's powerful, has influential friends. We're nobody." "Not nobody," I replied, an idea taking shape in my mind. "I'm a witness. And more than that, I have information he wouldn't want made public. During the years as the congressman's property, I had heard things, many things, names, dates, locations. Illegal business, bribes, influence peddling, even his involvement in the death of an investigative journalist that had been officially recorded as a car accident. You're thinking of reporting him? To whom? The police work for people like him. Jeremy was right, of course. The police weren't trustworthy. Many of the officers themselves were regular clients of places like the Nightflower Inn. The judges? Also on the payroll of men like Myers. The press? Controlled or intimidated by powerful interests. "I need to think," I replied. "There must be a way." It was then that, leafing through the same newspaper days later, I saw a small note about an organization called Mothers of Capitol Square, a group of women who gathered silently in front of the state capitol to protest for their missing sons and daughters, victims of political persecution or police brutality. Inspired by similar movements around the country, they defied the system with their silent but insistent presence. "That's it," I told Jeremy. "I'll look for these women. They have nothing to lose, just like me." He tried to dissuade me, worried about the risks, but I was determined. Using a scarf to cover my face, I went to Capitol Square on a Sunday when I knew they would be there. I observed from a distance for a while, trying to identify who seemed to lead the group. Finally, I gathered courage and approached an older woman with gray hair and dignified posture who was holding a photo of a young woman who looked very much like her. "I need to talk about people who also disappeared," I whispered. "People no one looks for, because they weren't considered important." She looked at me with eyes that knew suffering intimately. "Come with me," she replied simply. Her name was Mrs. Helen, and she had lost her university student daughter, Beth, 3 years earlier. They took her from college in broad daylight, she told me. I never saw her again. They say she was involved with subversives, but she just wanted a better country. Mrs. Helen took me to her home, a modest apartment downtown. There, I met 2 other women from the group. Mrs. Margaret, whose doctor son had disappeared after treating an injured activist, and Mrs. Connie, whose journalist husband never came home after publishing an article critical of the establishment. I told them my story, omitting nothing. I talked about the brothel, the years of abuse, Congressman Myers and his powerful friends, the fire, my escape. I talked about the girls who died, both in the fire and before, disappeared, silenced, forgotten because they were just prostitutes. I talked about the information I had, everything I had heard on nights when powerful men spoke freely in front of me, as if I were a piece of furniture, an object without ears or brain. I expected to see disgust, perhaps even contempt on the faces of those middle-class ladies. Instead, I saw understanding and an anger that echoed my own. The same men who make our children disappear are the ones who exploit girls like you, said Mrs. Helen, holding my hand. It's the same system of power and impunity. That's how, at 19, I joined a resistance group. We didn't take up arms or blow up barracks. Our fight was more subtle, more patient. We collected information, established connections, documented crimes that the system preferred to forget. Mrs. Helen had contacts with foreign journalists, people who could publish what the muzzled American press couldn't. Through her, I met Thomas, an American reporter who worked for the Washington Post and was working on a story about police corruption and abuse of power. "Your story is important," he told me after hearing my account. "And the information you have about politicians' involvement with trafficking, bribes, and even murders. This needs to be made public, even if not with your name attached." I spent days detailing everything I knew to Thomas. Names, dates, values, conversations I had heard. He meticulously noted everything, occasionally taking photos of my injuries still in the process of healing. The permanent marks that years of abuse had left on my body. "This will be published soon," he promised. "I can't guarantee it will bring down Congressman Myers immediately, but it will stain his reputation internationally. And more importantly, it will connect your story to a bigger problem. It will show how the sexual exploitation of minors is linked to political corruption and repression." 2 weeks later, the report came out. My name didn't appear. For my protection, I was identified only as a survivor from a brothel in Detroit. But the names of the powerful people involved were all there, including Congressman Myers. The repercussion was immediate. Embassies put pressure, human rights organizations expressed repudiation. The authorities, concerned about their image at a time when public trust in institutions was at an all-time low, found themselves forced to act. An investigation was opened, not about the brothel or the sexual exploitation itself, but about the congressman's connections to bribes and money laundering. Myers was called to testify, and feeling cornered, made the mistake of trying to flee the country. He was detained at Detroit Metro Airport with a suitcase full of undeclared cash, enough for him to be preventively arrested while investigations proceeded. I followed everything through the newspapers, hidden in the relative safety of Mrs. Helen's apartment, who had insisted that I move there when the report was published. "It's safer here," she said, "and you can continue your studies." Because yes, I had gone back to studying. With the help of the Mothers Group, I got new and legitimate documents and enrolled to finish elementary school at night. I was the oldest student in the class, but also the most determined. I studied with a hunger for knowledge that surprised even the teachers. Jeremy came to visit me whenever he could. Our relationship had evolved into something deep, but still chaste. I still wasn't ready for physical intimacy, and he respected that completely. "We have time," he would say, "a whole life ahead of us." The fall of Congressman Myers was just the beginning. Investigations led to other names, other schemes. A network of corruption and exploitation began to be dismantled. It wasn't the complete justice I dreamed of. Many escaped, protected by their connections. But it was more than I ever thought possible. In 1975, 2 years after my escape from the brothel, I was called to testify in the case against Myers. It was the hardest thing I ever did, facing that man again, feeling his hateful gaze on me as I related, with a trembling but firm voice, everything he had done to me and other girls. "Why should we believe you?" his lawyer asked, trying to discredit me. A former prostitute, without formal education, probably resentful because my client ended your relationship. I took a deep breath, looked directly into the eyes of that man in an expensive suit, and replied, "Because I'm telling the truth, and because I have scars to prove every word." The trial lasted weeks. Other women also testified, former employees of the brothel who had survived the fire, a former maid from the congressman's apartment who confirmed having seen young girls being taken there. Even a driver who worked for him decided to speak, fearing being implicated in the crimes. In the end, Myers was convicted, not for sexual abuse or exploitation of minors, crimes for which the evidence was deemed insufficient, but for corruption, tax evasion, and indirect involvement in the journalist's death. 15 years in prison, which in practice would mean much less, but still an unexpected victory. On the day of the sentence, I left the courthouse and breathed the free air of Detroit as if it were the first time. I was 21 years old, and finally felt that my life belonged to me again. "What are you going to do now?" asked Mrs. Helen, who had accompanied me every step of the process. I looked at Capitol Square, where brave women like her continued their silent vigil for justice, and knew exactly what I wanted. "I'm going to study law," I replied. "Or maybe become a police officer. I want to ensure that other girls don't go through what I went through. I want to be the person I needed when I was a child." She smiled, her eyes shining with what looked like contained tears. "Beth would be your age now," she said simply. "She would be proud to see a young woman like you." That moment, there on the courthouse steps, marked the true end of my captivity and the beginning of my mission. It wasn't just about revenge against one man. It was about changing an entire system that allowed girls to be treated as commodities. It was about transforming my pain into purpose, my scars into strength. And so, as Congressman Myers began to serve his sentence, I began my own journey of reconstruction and justice, a journey that would lead me to places I never imagined possible for a girl who grew up in the shadowy alleys of the Nightflower Inn. My dear viewers, if there's one thing I've learned in this long journey we call life, it's that paths are never straight or predictable. Like those cobblestone streets in old downtown Detroit, full of curves, unexpected ups and downs that take you to places you never imagined you'd know. After Myers' trial in 1975, I felt as if I could finally breathe without that constant weight on my chest. I was 21 years old, and for the first time, the future seemed possible, not just an empty word. I continued living with Mrs. Helen, who had become the mother I lost so early while finishing my basic education in night school. Jeremy and I made our relationship official that same year. A simple wedding at the courthouse, followed by lunch with the few people we considered family. Mrs. Helen, some women from the Mothers of Capitol Square group, 2 of his colleagues from the furniture factory, and Thomas, the journalist who had returned to follow up on the story. "I never imagined I would live to see this day," I confessed to Jeremy on our wedding night, finally ready for an intimacy that for years had seemed impossible. There were moments when I didn't believe I would live until the next day. Our first home was a tiny apartment in Corktown, 1 bedroom, kitchen, and bathroom, thin walls where we could hear the neighbors arguing. But it was ours, clean, safe. Each night that I lay down in that simple bed and woke up the next morning without fear seemed like a small miracle. In 1976, I managed to complete high school through night school. I studied during the day and, at night, worked as a cashier in a small market near home. The owner, Mr. Albert, was an Italian gentleman who didn't ask many questions about my past and valued my ability with numbers and my honesty. "The girl has a good head," he would say to customers, as if I were a rare find. "Doesn't make a single mistake, not a penny off in the register." It was Mr. Albert who showed me an advertisement in the newspaper that would change the course of my life. The Detroit Police Department was opening applications for the first recruitment that would accept women for the position of detective. "Look at this, Annie," he pointed to the small ad. "Isn't this what you always said you wanted to do? Work with justice? Protect others?" I read and reread that ad as if it were a message sent directly to me. The idea of becoming a police officer had emerged as a distant dream after Meyer's trial, but I never thought it would be possible so soon. We were in the midst of changing times, and law enforcement was still dominated by men, many of them compromised by the system and its abuses. But there was the opportunity, in black letters on the yellowed newspaper paper. The requirements: completed high school, age between 21 and 35, no criminal record. I met them all. When I told Jeremy about my intention to apply for the position, he was apprehensive. "Are you sure, Annie? The police. You know how it works. Many of them were clients of that place. What if they recognize you?" It was a risk, of course, but something inside me said it was worth trying. "It's precisely because I know how it works that I want to join," I replied. "I want to change it from the inside out. I want to be the kind of police officer I needed when I was a girl." I studied like never before for that exam. I woke up at 5 in the morning to read before work, took books to study during breaks at the market, stayed up late at night solving exercises in English, math, basic criminal law. Jeremy helped me as he could, asking questions, testing my knowledge. When the day of the test came, in March 1977, I was so nervous I could hardly swallow breakfast. I entered that public safety department building, feeling all eyes on me. We were few women among hundreds of men, many of them already with military or private security experience. The test lasted 4 hours. I left exhausted, but confident that I had done the best I could. Now it was time to wait. 2 weeks later, when the results were announced, I could hardly believe seeing my name among those approved for the next phase. I had ranked 12th out of more than 500 candidates. The next stages included physical and psychological tests and a background check. It was in this last part that almost everything fell apart. How to explain the years without formal work or study records? How to justify that there was no documentation about my life between 11 and 19 years of age? I decided that the only way out was the truth, or at least an edited version of it. When called for the interview with the detective in charge of selection, Detective Mauricio Leal, I told him that I had lost my parents very young, technically true, and lived in a vulnerable situation for years, a euphemism, but true, until I managed to resume my studies and rebuild my life with help from people who believed in me. Absolutely true. Detective Leal looked at me for a long time after my account, his penetrating eyes searching for any sign of lie on my face. "Miss Annie," he finally said, "normally this kind of gap would be cause for immediate disqualification." My heart sank. All that studying, all that hope. "However," he continued, "your results in the tests were exceptional, and there's something in your determination that reminds me of someone I knew a long time ago." He paused, as if deciding whether to continue. "My younger sister ran away from home at 15. She also ended up in places no young woman should know. I never saw her again. I always wondered if someone extended a hand to help her, if she had a second chance like you seem to have had." I didn't know what to answer. I just nodded, feeling a lump in my throat. "I'll approve your continuation in the selection process," he concluded, "but know that you will be under constant observation. One slip, any indication of inappropriate behavior, and you will be discharged immediately. Understood?" "Yes, sir. You won't regret it." In August 1977, at 24, I entered the Detroit Police Academy as part of the first class that included women. We were only 8 in a class of 60 students. 8 pioneers facing distrustful looks, sexist jokes, and the constant need to prove we were as capable as any man. The training was brutally difficult, physically and emotionally. Theory classes in the morning, physical training in the afternoon, study at night. I learned investigation techniques, criminal law, self-defense, shooting. Each time I held a gun in shooting classes, I remembered Congressman Myers pointing that pistol at me on the night of the fire, and my determination was renewed. The other women in the class came from completely different backgrounds than mine. Daughters of military personnel, former civil servants, a lawyer who decided to change careers. I didn't share my past with any of them, but we formed a silent alliance, supporting each other against the hostile environment. It wasn't easy. There were moments when I wanted to give up, nights when I cried myself to sleep, exhausted and doubting if I really belonged there. Jeremy was my pillar throughout this time. He who had abandoned his own dreams of being a teacher to work in jobs that paid better and supported us while I studied. One day you'll make a difference in someone's life, just as Thomas and Mrs. Helen made in yours, he reminded me in the most difficult moments. It's worth continuing. In December 1978, I graduated as a detective for the Detroit Police Department, ranking third in my class. At the graduation ceremony, when I received my badge and my credentials, I cried without shame. That small piece of metal represented not just a professional achievement, but a complete personal transformation, from the abused girl in the brothel to the woman who would now have power to protect other girls. My first assignment was at the Child and Adolescent Protection Unit, at the time, a new and still undervalued division within the police structure. The chief detective, Detective Claudio Barros, was one of the few progressive men in the institution who truly believed that children and adolescents deserved special protection. "I have no illusions, Detective Annie," he told me on the first day. "What we do here is like mopping up an ocean. For every child we manage to help, 10 others continue to suffer. But if we make a difference in the life of just one, it's been worth it." My first big case came just 3 months after I started. An anonymous tip about an establishment in North Detroit where underage girls were being sexually exploited. The shiver I felt when reading that preliminary report was immediate. It was like looking at my own past. I convinced Detective Barros to let me lead the investigation, even though I was the newest on the team. "I have experience with this kind of situation," was all I could say, and something in my look must have communicated the rest, because he just nodded and gave me carte blanche. I spent weeks in surveillance, collecting evidence, identifying those responsible and regular clients. I saw girls being taken inside, some clearly no more than 13 or 14 years old. Each night I spent watching that place without being able to act immediately was torture, but I knew we needed to build a solid case. When we finally conducted the operation, in April 1979, we rescued 8 girls, the youngest just 12 years old. We arrested the owner of the establishment, 3 managers, and several clients who were on the premises at the time of the raid, including a city councilman and a local businessman. Upon entering that place, it was impossible not to be transported back to the Night Flower Inn. The same smells, the same empty looks in the girls' eyes, the same palpable despair in the air. When one of the rescued girls cowered in fear upon seeing me in uniform, I knelt beside her and whispered, "I know exactly how you feel. I was in your place once, but now you're safe, I promise." That operation was just the beginning. In the following years, I specialized in cases of sexual exploitation of minors and human trafficking. In 1982, I was promoted to inspector, the first woman to reach this position in the history of the Detroit Police Department. In 1985, with the expansion of specialized units, I helped create the first specialized unit for crimes against women in Detroit, inspired by models that were beginning to emerge in other major cities. Throughout these years, Jeremy and I built our family. In 1980, we adopted Clara, a 5-year-old girl rescued in one of my operations, whose parents had been murdered by the trafficker they worked for. 2 years later, against all medical expectations, the years of abuse had left physical sequelae. I naturally became pregnant, and we welcomed our son, Peter. Life wasn't always easy. I faced death threats more times than I can count, bribery attempts, campaigns to discredit me. When I arrested the son of an influential politician for involvement with trafficking teenagers in 1989, I almost lost my job due to political pressure. But I was no longer that frightened and powerless girl. I was a woman who knew her worth and didn't back down from threats. In 1994, Congressman Myers, who had served only 8 of his 15-year sentence thanks to pardons and progression of regime, was released. I received the news with a mixture of anger and resignation. The system I was trying to change from within still protected men like him. 3 years later, in 1997, our paths crossed again, in the most unexpected way. I was called to investigate a murder in a luxury hotel in downtown Detroit. The victim, former Congressman Myers, found dead with 3 shots to the chest. Everyone expected me to celebrate, perhaps even refuse to investigate the case. Instead, I conducted the investigation with the same professionalism and rigor that I applied to any other case. We discovered that the killer was the brother of one of the girls who had died in the fire at the Nightflower Inn so many years before. A man who had spent 2 decades planning his revenge. When we arrested him, he looked me in the eyes and said, "You should thank me. I did what justice didn't do." "Justice isn't about revenge," I replied, feeling the weight of each word. "It's about responsibility, consequences, and the chance for reconstruction. If I had chosen the path of revenge instead of justice, I wouldn't be here today, rescuing other girls and arresting other predators." In 2003, after 25 years of service, I retired from the police department with the rank of captain, a position I achieved only in the last 5 years of my career. At the farewell ceremony, I looked at the auditorium full of colleagues, many of whom had started out distrusting the little woman and now stood in respect. I saw my husband, Jeremy, with hair already gray, but the same gentle smile that won me over in those dark days at the brothel. I saw our daughter Clara, now a young doctor at 28, and our son Peter, a law student at 21. And in the front row, I saw Mrs. Helen, now 80 years old, but still with erect posture and determined look. She never found her missing daughter, but she had found in me a kind of continuation of Beth's fight. I had found in her the mother I lost so early. Life has these perfect circles, my dear viewers. That abused and hopeless girl from the Nightflower Inn transformed into the woman who dedicated her life to ensuring that other girls wouldn't go through the same. The scars never completely disappeared. I still have occasional nightmares. There are still certain touches that make me instinctively recoil, certain smells that transport me to that terrible place. But I learned that our wounds can become our greatest strength, that our pain can be transformed into purpose, that even from the most terrible experiences, something of value can be born if we refuse to be defined solely by what was done to us. Today, at 72, I look back and see not just the horror of the brothel, but also the beauty of reconstruction. I see the faces of the hundreds of girls and women I was able to help throughout my career. I see my grandchildren growing up in a world that, although still far from ideal, has more protection mechanisms for the vulnerable than there were in my childhood. And I see you, who are listening to me now. If my story touched your heart, I ask that you leave a like on this video and subscribe to our Grandparents' Tales channel. Each subscription gives me strength to continue sharing these memories, which aren't always easy to relive, but which can help someone who is going through difficult times. Don't forget to leave a comment letting us know where you're watching from. I always enjoy connecting with all of you and learning about the different places our stories reach. Never forget, my dear, no matter how dark the night, dawn always comes. And sometimes, it's precisely the darkest nights that make us truly appreciate the beauty of light when it finally appears. A warm hug from Grandma Annie, who learned that life can be cruel, but also incredibly generous to those who refuse to give up hope.